Hello and welcome to another interview for the Leader Campus. And this time we're talking to Marcel Daane, and he's in Singapore. And so this will be our first international interview, which is kind of nice.
Yeah, nice.
So thank you very much for giving us the time and the efforts to be here.
No worries, and thanks for staying up. It's early morning here and late at night over there on your side, so I appreciate that.
Yeah, 13-hour difference, so we're doing fine, though. Okay, so the first question really that I want to ask you is that on your website you have this idea of mindset coaching. So how does mindset coaching fit into leadership?
Well, that is a really good question, and I guess the easiest way to answer that is my philosophy with regards to leadership is a lot of people, I think, misunderstand leadership as being a way how to influence other people. And, and of course we want to influence people in a positive way, right? So inspiring them. And can you still hear me? Because I noticed that the internet connection got a little unstable there. So
it's freezing a little bit, but we'll hear the
a downside of being a 13-hour delay.
Yeah, but we're
good. Okay,
we're hearing you. Your picture may freeze a little bit, but we are hearing you well.
Fantastic. Okay, so of course leadership, a lot of people think is really about kind of positively influencing people in terms of inspiring and motivating and doing all of these kind of stuff, and really getting other people to kind of apply some form of action. As where I tend to feel that I like in my family we have a saying: if you can't take care of yourself, you can't take care of others. So a lot of what we do in terms of leadership is really about what we do on a daily basis, the little things, the little rituals, our little behaviors, and how those behaviors really influence the people around us. And in order for us to better lead ourselves, I guess, in that sense, requires a certain mindset. And the mindset, of course, that we need to be a source of inspiration is really about, kind of, this really delves into Carol Dweck's work on growth mindset versus fixed mindset. Are you that kind of person who approaches their challenges in a positive way and sees failures as learning opportunities? And are you the kind of person who articulates that in a way that actually does inspire yourself, but also inspires other people? And so I find that with a lot of the leaders that I coach, there seems to be a little bit of a disconnect with some of our leaders in terms of how they think they can treat themselves versus how they think they need to treat other people. And when we have that disconnection, thinking that what I'm saying applies to them, but it doesn't necessarily apply to me, then with that disconnection, you create kind of an inauthentic brand as a leader, right? And so you end up branding yourself a little bit less authentically than you probably could be. And so my approach is and I talk about leadership branding a lot in terms of how are you branding yourself as a human being, as a leader, as a colleague, as a parent, and a lot of what we know about branding is really about are all of your touch points. So every single person you touch with regards to emails, calls, what you say, what you do, all of those touch points, are you speaking the same language? That level of consistency is essential in authentic leadership because that's what builds trust and that's what builds loyalty. And so we can't just talk about how to influence other people without actually being able to influence ourselves first. So that's why I tend to look at that and I say, okay, it's great that we want these objectives. We want our people to be able to do certain things extra or, hit larger milestones or, whatever it is. But let's bring that back just a notch and let's see at how we are doing on a daily basis so that we can master this. And once we master it, then we can better influence the people that are around us. So kind of like one of those walk the walk and talk the talk things, or, leading by example type.
So you're bringing in authentic leadership as well. how does this impact the idea also that you have this brain-based leadership, because you have that on your website as well?
Exactly. I think it's there are many conversations that I have with my with my leaders, and I find that with the level of awareness, especially with regards to accountability, right? A lot of my leaders tend to feel some level of guilt or even shame with regards to kind of their failures as leaders and how they are actually positively influencing people. And what I like to do is I like to try and remove that shame and that guilt, because when you're as a person in a state of shame or in guilt, it's very difficult to be your authentic self. It's very difficult to inspire people, so it doesn't necessarily work. So you have to learn some form of self-forgiveness. And coming from the healthcare and fitness industry myself, I've always understood the nuts and bolts of human behavior. It's always something I've enjoyed, and hence studying neuroscience for me was an essential component. And what I found most helpful for me with neuroscience is really that understanding that many of our behaviors come from the wiring of the brain. Mm-hmm. And our brains are wired a certain way from, both genetic as well as environmental components that wire our brains to have certain beliefs and habits and all of these kind of things in the way that we behave. And when we understand these neural mechanisms, we understand that there's actually a mechanical component to our behavior that can be fixed. And what that actually does is it removes that guilt, because now all of a sudden the leaders kind of go, hey, wow, it's not necessarily me. There's not like a mythical thing about me being a failure as a human being, but it's a component of my brain that just needs to be wired differently. And if I do this and this and this and this, and I rewire that component of my brain, I'm going to be better. So it's a very empowering component of actually how to build, self-sufficiency and confidence in any leader, because they know what components of the brain that then requires work, and that ends up becoming a lot of our coaching.
Now, we have a question on the Leader Campus that talks about fear. So you're talking about this aspect of guilt. How does fear play in this as well?
Well, that's fantastic. And when we're looking in terms of emotion, right? So if fear is an emotion. And unfortunately, it's an emotion that we tend to not like, right? Mm-hmm. But it really is one of 6 fundamental emotions. And when we look at a lot of the research in terms of emotions, many of the feelings that we have are combinations of emotions, right? So So, for example, if we look at the 6 fundamental emotions, which are happiness, sadness, anger, and fear, surprise, and disgust, right? So when we look at an example is frustration. When you feel frustrated when you're trying to do something, the feeling of frustration is not an emotion. It's actually a combination of 2 emotions, which is anger and fear, right? So it's more about having an understanding that fear is not necessarily a bad emotion. There are no bad emotions and good emotions. They're just emotions. These emotions lead to how we feel, but these feelings then lead to how we interpret and perceive, and therefore make decisions on how we're going to respond or behave in regards to those feelings, right? Mm-hmm. So when we're looking at something like fear, it's not necessarily about being fearless. It's more about just understanding that this fear is just an emotion that is based on my perceptions and probably fueled by my memories, right? Mm-hmm. Which then creates simulations about the future, which then drives anxiety. And if I know these mechanisms, then it's easier for me to stop them. It's easier for me to stop allowing these emotions to start controlling the way I'm behaving, and rather than just managing them a lot better. We call that top-down regulation, right? So where we use the prefrontal cortex, which is the rational thinking and strategizing part of the brain, to kind of healthfully and positively manage and regulate those emotional centers in the brain that tend to just want to run havoc each time that we have a situation that might make us feel afraid, right? You know, so it's more about having that awareness in our brains, and this is what we also teach in the coaching process, is that when we have a leader who feels something, rather than just acting and behaving on that feeling, to actually take a step back and go, at this moment in time, this is what I'm feeling.
Okay.
That's interesting. Okay, let's have a conversation internally. Let's have a conversation about how I'm feeling and where does it come from. And so what that does, of course, it eliminates things like knee-jerk reactions and all of these kind of things and all of these kind of behaviors that, you know, are generally not in the best interest of leaders.
So that gives you authenticity when you share that. Also, I think it opens up the opportunity for the if you want to say report or the team member, or to open up to you as well.
Exactly, because the conversations become different, right? You know, so there's some really great constructive conversations that we can have with regards to saying, hey, listen, you know, this is what my brain is feeling right now, rather than saying this is what I'm feeling or this is what you're doing, or say, you know, my brain kind of is taking in this information and is processing it in a certain way, and it's creating these feelings inside me, and I want to have a conversation about that. You know, is there some merit to this? Is there not? You know, where does this actually come from? So right away, what you're doing is you also create a little bit of a kind of a healthy distance between you and the person that you're having a conversation with, which is also really powerful in things like negotiations and stuff like that. You know, and there are presidents in this world that could really learn from those kind of techniques, for example. You know, so just in terms of how to have the right type of you know, utilizing the right type of skills when we're actually negotiating in certain ways, if we can separate ourselves from that actual information that we're receiving at that moment in time. So it's a very powerful tool.
So that leads in then to I think you wrote an essay of some sort about Headstrong Performance. So
yeah, so Headstrong Performance is the name of my book. So
the book, okay.
So I wrote a book a number of years ago called Headstrong Performance, and Headstrong Performance was actually inspired by my research. When I was doing research in my and I did a master's degree in neuroscience and leadership.
Oh wow!
And so when I was doing the research component of that, because I come from the healthcare industry, my undergraduate degree is actually in clinical nutrition. So when I was doing my master's, I discovered that there was a very, very much when we look at human behavior, there's an approach from kind of the shoulders up type of approach where we just look at behaviors in the head. But, you know, coming from kind of more of a healthcare background, I understand that, you know, also the state of our body affects the state of our brain. For example, if you choose to have donuts and coffee for breakfast, you know, whatever's in those donuts goes into your brain first, right? You know, and it actually affects how the neurons function and how the wiring actually happens in the brain. And it changes the way that we perceive and that we think and we behave. So for me, it's never been a kind of a clear-cut thing that behavior is simply a shoulders-up approach. So I try to, in my research, kind of do more of a holistic look at human behavior and saying, okay, you know, how are the executives, you know, how are they sleeping, how are they behaving, how are they eating, are they exercising, are they doing all of these kind of things, and how are their behaviors contributing to the fitness of their brain when it comes down to being able to make, especially with regards to what I just spoke about with, you know, regulating the emotional centers of the brain. And actually, that's what I researched. And I had, here in Singapore, I had 118 senior executives from 4 different industries, 50% male, 50% female. It was a fantastic group of people who all just, you know, willingly subjected themselves to you know, my research. And what I actually discovered through that process, I developed it's basically based on normative data, but we can assess based on these cognitive tests. We can assess at what age a person's brain is performing. So for example, if you're, you know, 45 years old and you're you know, you're having your brain's basically responding maybe a lot slower than it should be, at processing speed slower, the memory processing, all of these kind of things. And we can normalize that with normative data, and we can compare it to different age groups, and we can kind of say, hey, listen, you might be 45 years old, but your brain is performing at the age of, a 50-year-old or a 60-year-old, or maybe even a 20-year-old if your brain is, performing really, really well. And so I developed this assessment specifically for that research. And what I discovered was that the majority of my executives, actually the average age was 44, but the average brain performance age was between 70 and 77. Yeah, and so
Really?
This is not 70 to 77 in a healthy way. This is not in a wisdom kind of way. This is in poor brain performance kind of way. And that was really striking to me. I was, because here I'm doing this research and I'm seeing this data and going, wow, I mean, that's mind blowing. Here companies are spending, millions and millions of dollars on bringing in great talent. And they bring in these people, who really, clearly, sharp people, they, great at what they do and all these kinds of things. And then for some reason they get put in this environment, and that environment that they're working in allows their brains to age at such a rapid rate that these brains end up being 70 to 77 years old, and so how and so I'm looking at what's the ROI of that? What's the return of investment in terms of how we're actually treating our people in that specific way? And so that became kind of my trigger, so to speak. So after I finished my master's, I had all of this data and I guess this concept in my mind that, maybe we need to start looking differently at how we are, treating our people, but also how we're treating ourselves if we really want to get the most out of ourselves. And so I thought, that's a story that needs to be told. I still don't know if people want to hear it, but it's a story that I felt that people that needed to be told because it's so relevant. And so I ended up then kind of investing about a year of my time writing this book, which came out about a year and a half ago. And it's all built around what are the basic lifestyle behaviors that actually affect your brain function based on that research. So, and it's all very simple stuff. It's, if you really want to get the most out of yourself, it really, it's really important to make sure that you are getting enough sleep. And, having working 20 hours a day is not a badge of honor, in this day and age, what we know about, the research of sleep. If you sleep 4 hours a day, the next day you are going to be behaving like an idiot. You might think that you're really smart, but everybody else around you knows, and that's kind of what we're kind of relating to. And the same thing counts with, skipping your exercise and, making sure that you're eating well, and, all of these kind of simple things that we can do on a daily basis to actually help protect our brains and help our brains kind of function in the best way possible. And that should be a dual investment. It should be an investment from the company, right? The company should be facilitating that or allowing people to take the best care of their brains. But at the same time, of course, individuals also need to take some level of responsibility because the company can't force people to take better care of their brains. So it's a mutual decision. And the interesting thing about that is that there's some really great research out there that shows that organizations that have greater populations of people that actually do take responsibility for how they take care of themselves, how they lead themselves, basically, also are from organizations with much greater levels of engagement. And as we know, organizations with high levels of engagement also tend to be a lot more profitable. Mm-hmm. So there's a direct return of investment if we can somehow inspire and motivate our people to actually take responsibility for our own performance, and not a performance standpoint from, hey, are you making enough sales or you're doing this, but really kind of like, how are we performing on a daily basis as human beings, right? So and that's where this whole kind of concept started to brew and started to come from. So and that's what I do today.
Can that then make person who is a leader maybe more adaptable to the situations that are at hand because there is more clear thinking of their
Yes.
brain, the aging brain?
Absolutely. So there's the other interesting thing that came out of my assessment over the years that I've been using this assessment with teams and leaders is that there's actually a direct correlation between the age of their brain and their level of adaptability. So we know that adaptability in today's today's corporate world is an essential component, especially with so much disruption that's actually really happening. Organizations are looking for ways how to become leaner and how to become more agile and more adaptable. And in my opinion, we can't just keep requiring people to say, hey, yes, we're we're becoming leaner and leaner and leaner. We're becoming more automated. But at the same time, we also need to say, what can we do to kind of protect you and protect your brain in such a way that it actually allows you to perform at your absolute best, even though this organization is becoming ever leaner and leaner and leaner, and I think that's one area that a lot of companies at this point in time still underappreciate. I still think there can be a lot more work done in kind of creating a better synergy between the status, the performance status, or the performance capacity, I like to call it, of the employee versus the performance demands of the company. And I think that needs to be a much more holistic process still. I think a lot of it is still, processed through automation and all of these kind of things. But at the end of the day, an organization is determined by its people. And it's the people who utilize the systems that really create the success. And so I think there needs to be a much more holistic and a much better way of actually blending the two, rather than just seeing them as two separate kind of entities, if you know what I mean. I don't think companies can fully get the best return of investment if they keep seeing these two processes actually as two different things. So they have to be more interconnected.
Now, you've talked about how the influence you've had because you've been involved in training, personal training. You also were involved in the military. We talked a little bit before the interview started. Have you kind of tossed away this top-down, because most military is top-down. So has there been any influence of the military still creeping into what you do with training for people?
In some ways, yes, absolutely. And even though in the military there is a top-down approach, their research shows that there are two situations where a top-down kind of leadership approach works best. And those tend to be when people are new in their jobs, right, and during times of a disaster, right? So when there's a crisis, people will always look to the leader and say, "Tell me what to do," right? And so I think what is missing in the corporate world, what the military really understands well, and I struggled for this because I was in the military for 10 years. And when I left the military, what the military has over, let's say, the civilian world is purpose, right? Every military person who is, it doesn't matter if they're in the Navy, Air Force, Army, Navy, SEALs, it doesn't matter what it is. They all have the same sense of purpose. They know why they're there and why they go through the amount of crap that they do. And they're happily willing to do it because that purpose to them is so important. There is such a strong emotional connection with their sense of purpose that it keeps everything running and everything working together. And I think that's what tends to be very lacking in civilian life. I think a lot of people lack purpose, and we know that purpose is a strong driver in terms of fulfillment, right? In terms of happiness and fulfillment, we need to have a strong sense of purpose. So I think what organizations really want to learn from the military is how do you create that sense of purpose in your people, right? And at the end of the day, purpose is emotionally driven, and so it really is about how do you understand the emotional status of your people, and how can you articulate what you want to achieve in such a way where their emotional brains go, yeah, that's awesome. I want to be part of that, right? And that's what we had in the military every single day, and that made things so much easier. Yeah,
I agree. I think that making the situation not only purpose, but understanding your position within the organization of if you're not there, because I think sometimes people lose the attention of that. When they get higher up, they keep looking at maybe the people that are sweeping the floors, that they're not as important. But if somebody walks into your office and sees just crap all over everywhere, they don't have a very good impression of your company.
Exactly. And, there's a great story back in that. I don't know how much time, but I love the story. It actually happened during the days of John F. Kennedy, and it was his. We're going to put a man on the moon mission. Back in the early 60s, where he announced that we're going to put a man on the moon. And pretty much the whole, of the United States thought he was insane. He was crazy, right? Because, back then, a lot of apartment buildings didn't even have elevators, let alone
yeah,
moon, right?
You're right.
He had this vision, and he was so driven by that vision, even in that short period of time that he was in the White House, and a lot of his efforts were really put into kind of driving this mission to get that done. And his message was so strong that there was apparently one night, kind of in the Oval Office, when he finished work at like 10 or 11 o'clock at night and closed the door, and the lights are off and everybody's left already, and then there are two guys cleaning the floor, right? They're standing over the Eagle right there by the West Wing, and they're polishing the floor, and he walks up to these two guys and he says, it's 11 o'clock at night. What are you guys doing polishing the floor? And they turn around and said, sir, we're putting a man on the moon, sir. And I think that's the power of purpose, is when every single person in your organization bleeds that mission. When they know that their job, no matter how large or how small it might be, is to help the entire organization get to where it needs to be. And that's very powerful. And there are a few organizations around the world that have great missions, and they have really great people who bleed that mission as well and have such great sense of purpose. But then there are just so many others that really struggle to find what their mission really is, what their purpose would really be. And so I think a large part of the leadership consulting that we need to be doing is really talking to our leadership, especially leadership teams, about why are you here, right? What is your purpose? Where do you want to go? What is it, and how can, it's not about, we want to drive, 15% more revenue next year. There's no emotional connection to that, right? It really is about doing good in life, and and being able to achieve things that nobody else has achieved before, and exploring the unknown and doing all of these kind of things. These are things that people get really emotionally connected to and go, I want to be part of that. I want to jump on that boat, and I'm going to sail it, and I don't care how much crap I have to go through. This is worth it, and I think our brains need that sense of direction and that sense of purpose, and without being able to articulate that, everybody just gets very lost, and then their brains automatically gravitates towards focusing on themselves, because that's what the human brain does. The human brain is genetically designed to think about itself first, self-preservation, before it thinks of anybody else. And the only way that we can get it to think of a bigger picture first before it really kind of thinks about its own little issues is if it is emotionally driven to do so. Otherwise, it just won't. It's just that's the basic neuroscience of engagement and behavior.
Well, I think that this discussion that you've given us is just fantastic. I thank you so much for your time, and I think we'll have to call it there, but maybe we can come back to you sometime in the future and talk a little bit more, because it's fascinating. So I thank you again, Marcel Daane. Is that right?
Anything, it doesn't matter. Just I've learned it's actually, it's pronounced Daane, but I've heard so many versions. I'm fine with it.
Well, my last name is Wildermuth, so they've butchered that before too. So I just don't care either. It really doesn't impact me at all. So, but I want to thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. Give a plug for your book here before we take off.
Sure. So Headstrong Performance is the name of the book. Simply go to the website or Google Headstrong Performance. Easiest way to do it. But if you go to the website headstrongperformance.net, you'll also find more information about not just the book, but also the assessment and also about the certification program that I run as well, because I also certify coaches as well in how to do that.
Oh, wow. Fantastic. Okay. Well, I think our purpose here has been complete, and at least for the time being. So thank you so much for your time again. And I wanted to say nighty-night. Oh, well, for you, it's good morning.
Good morning. That's right. I'm about to start the day. So, Mel, thank you very much. It was an absolute pleasure. And to the listeners and the watchers, thank you very much as well.
Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.